All right, let's get started. All right, welcome everybody. So today we're gonna wrap up the week number 1, where we've been discussing HTML. And so let's go over the syllabus and the calendar, see where we've been so far and where we might be going. Earlier this week, we discussed using HTML to create a user interface for our web-based application. And okay, some folks want to join from the phone, so let me give them a hyperlink. There we go. I hope that helps. Let me know if you shouldn't need a password to join, but let me know if you need one. Right, so last week we created a boilerplate React application using Create React App. And then early this week, we started discussing some of the basic skill set that you need to learn about HTML for creating a user interface for building a web application. And we started playing around with headings and paragraphs and lists and tables and how to create forms. And to practice this, right, we started working on the first assignment. We started building a prototype, a pseudo version of the Canvas application with K, right, and that gave us a chance to create all sorts of screens. Right, we discussed creating creating a profile editor. Right, we discussed creating an assignment editor, right, where we had a whole bunch of form elements, and so we learned about input fields and drop downs and checkboxes, radio buttons, date pickers. Right, we built several of these screens and created all these hyperlinks that allowed us to navigate between the various screens. We looked at using tables for creating tabular data, but also we misused tables for laying out content horizontally, right, in multiple columns. We'll come back to this later next week and in the next couple lectures, right, to use CSS to properly style this, properly lay out, using CSS and the Bootstrap library. Let's see the question on the chat. Is it to have on input checkbox, radio button elements, or can they be used as standalone elements? Wait, is it? Let me see the question. Is it necessary to have all the input checkbox, radio button elements with a form element, or can they be used standalone elements? Yeah. So when the input fields were created originally, they weren't meant to be used only inside of a form element, right? And the form element could be configured to submit the information in the form, right? To gather all the data in the form, right, and submit it to a server for processing. So that has been true for I think the very first decade of web development, from the 90s to 2000s and early 2000s. With the maturing of JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks, we have gone away from that and instead took over the handling of forms. Right, instead of letting the browser do its default behavior of using the form elements to gather the input fields and process them and format them into a query string. Instead, we're going to be using JavaScript to do that. So elements will be able to exist outside of the form, right? As long as they have some ID or class or something that we can reference, right? We can read the value of the input field programmatically and validate it ourselves and format it ourselves, right, into a JSON object that we can then programmatically send over to the server without the need of a form element, right? So right now we are using the form element in particular to use its behavior default behavior, right, of being able to navigate between screens, right, when you click and using its behavior of navigating and sending the data over to somebody who's going to process it, right? Typically, it would be a server. We don't have a server yet, so we're just using it to navigate between multiple screens, right? And so, and I believe, did we get a chance to practice that in the profile? We did not. Okay, so we will practice that today, and we will see how that behavior works and how forms gather the data and send it over to as a query string. But this is a behavior that has been around for decades, right? Which we no longer use it as much, right? Instead, we're going to be using JavaScript to do that. Let's see. Hello, for the input text fields and other input fields for the assignment, will we have to wrap it in a form attribute? Yeah, that's what I'm discussing. So we'll talk about that a little later when we look at the profile. So could you explain a bit more about the impact of the form element? Yes, when we get to the profile and the navigation between the profile and the profile editor, we'll discuss some of that. Let's explain what a span and div is. Is it not going to be included in the class? Yes, we are going to be using span and div quite a bit, and I'll discuss it a little later. But in particular, when we get to classes, we're going to refactor a lot of the tables that we use for horizontal layout. We're going to refactor that to use divs instead. Also, we're going to be using span, right, to be able to grab a piece of element or DOM, right, and be able to style it, overriding perhaps the any styling that is defined by its parent. So yes, we'll get a chance to play around with that as well. If you already are familiar with the div and the span elements, please go right ahead and use it if you know already how it works. All right, so let's go back to the lecture. Great questions, excellent, thank you. Yeah, so we've been building these HTML screens, right, in terms of snippets that we have been building and creating, right, and laying it out in this fashion. We will. The current implementation doesn't look much like the target screenshot that we have here, right? It looks much more rougher, right, and unfinished. It's using the default styling of the browser, which is Times New Roman, bulleted lists, right, blue hyperlinks and things like that. That is the default styling, and we'll discuss that a little later when we get to CSS. Also, our implementation with using just plain old HTML has been of copying and pasting a lot of code over, so because some of them are being reused. When we get to JavaScript, we'll revisit this and we'll create components that can be reused, imported, right, and then reused in several places. Can everybody please mute? We're hearing some noise in the background. Okay. Yeah, so today I want to finish up the HTML coverage, right? At least the minimum set of skills. We'll keep adding as we go further, but this is the kind of like the baseline set of HTML elements that we're going to be using throughout the course. Next week, again, in the next assignment, we're going to revisit it to add styling, and then the week after that, we're going to use JavaScript, right, to automate, and modularize and create components out of the HTML that we have, so that we can make them into reusable, self-contained abstract modules, right, that you can then build, right, to you can combine them to build ever more sophisticated stuff. Okay, so that's the plan for the next several weeks. Next week, on a week from today, and there will be we're going to have our first quiz, and well, it's going to be made available, and then you'll have a couple of days to complete it on your own. It's only about 20 to 30 minutes of your time. You just have to find a free time slot within those 48 hours or so for you to take that quiz. Okay, and it's all going to be about HTML, right? So I'm going to give you a code snippet of HTML, and I'm going to ask you questions about attributes. I might ask you, hey, here's an input field. It has the this gray background, right? And when you hover on top of it, it appears this little blurb, this tooltip. How would you implement that, right? Or it has a maximum data or whatever. It can't be less than something. How would you implement that, right? So also acronyms. I'm big on acronyms. Make sure you know what HTML stands for, HTTP, URLs, CSS, right? All these acronyms. Make sure you know what they mean. Question in the chat. Yes, the quizzes. All my quizzes are open book. All right. Okay, so let's continue. So let's revisit the assignment that we've implemented so far, see where we are, and what else do we want to implement. In particular, I do want to visit the profile, since that's one of the other skills that we want to learn about, being able to submit a form and navigate to another screen, right? And we'll see how when a form gets submitted, it parses the content of the form and then creates a query strings that it sends it over to a server or some target URL that's going to process that data. So we're going to cover that. And then I do want to take a moment to discuss making your project or your assignment available on a remote server. Right now, you have it set up so that it's running on your local machine, and well, no one can come and grade you at your laptop, right? So instead, we're going to push all that source code and deploy it on a public server, right? We're going to use Netlify for that. And also, I want to discuss the project requirements, since it's never too early to get started on the project. Okay. All right. Yeah. So let's take a look at where we left off with the assignment. Okay. So let's see. So last time around we discussed that the entry point of any website, right? When you start a server, right? When you start a server, npm start, when the server is running, right? It looks at this public directory, right? That's the root of the file system, right? That the server is going to serve. Anything that you put in there is made available publicly and can be accessed by navigating, right? Providing file names and directories, and that allows you to navigate this this file structure under the public directory. So public is mapped to this root, context, we call it, right? This slash over here, or nothing. And now you can explicitly ask for a document, but if you don't ask for a particular file, it assumes that you mean the index file within that folder, right? So within this folder, the index file that's in there, it's this one, right? And you see here that that's indeed what is getting rendered, right? A welcoming heading, which is this one. Then a list of hyperlinks, which are those over here, that each one allows you to navigate to different assignments, right? And for this week, we're working on the assignment number 1. Okay. There's some magic React.js that we're going to cover in a couple of weeks. We said that that's inside the source directory, and the entry point for that is index.js. Since we don't want to deal with this just yet, right? We have commented it out, so it's not having any effect on our application at all, right? So this is basically our application, this static HTML content, right? Which is just an ASCII file. Okay. So these allow us to navigate to the various assignments, which are navigate the file structure until you find these files that are under the labs. There they are. So lab one, lab right here, index. And this you are on your own, right? You're working on these assignments, these labs, following the instructions. They're pretty specific about what you're asked to do, and you're expected to complete it in this file, right? But what we did is that we focused on the second half of the assignment that talks about implementing the Canvas application, right? And the strategy that at least I took was to take a look at the application that we're asked to implement. Right, so starting at the top, right, we're asked to implement something like this, and so it looks like it has a couple of sidebars that have hyperlinks that allow us to navigate in different places. And what I thought was to create a directory structure that mirrored the organization of what we have here in the navigation. Apparently, you can navigate to accounts, to dashboard, you can navigate to courses, calendar, and so on and so forth. So my strategy was that, well, I'm going to follow that structure. Under the Canvas directory, I created directories for each one of those subsections, right? Then within a particular of these sections, for instance, inside of the courses, there's also some organization under there, right? It looks like we once you go into courses, you can also go down to modules, home, Piazza, assignments, quizzes, grades, and so on and so forth. So I follow that organization as well, right? So under courses, I created directories for those as well, assignments, grades, home, modules. Okay, I also took the approach that if I'm going to build this screen, one approach would be to create the entire content inside of one HTML document, which is what we're going to do eventually. But before that, what I did is that instead of starting to build everything in one single file, what I did is I created individual snippets, right, that allowed you to implement these portions of the screen, kind of independently of each other, right? So I call this, for instance, the Canvas Navigator sidebar. This is the Course Navigator sidebar. Right? This was kind of like the modules, and here on the right was kind of like the course status, right? And it's useful to break out these logically and architecturally, right, to be able to deal with the complexity of building something big, right? Especially if you see that certain things are being reused everywhere. For instance, this Canvas Navigator seems that it's a common theme across several screens. Like, for instance, under the grades, you still have this sidebar. If you go to the assignments, you still have the sidebar. If you go to the editor, you still have the sidebar. If you go to the profile, you still have the sidebar. So it looks like it's a common theme. We also see that the second navigation sidebar is also kind of like shared across multiple screens, right? There's another version of it in the profile when you go to the accounts. When you go to the account, there's a profile editor here, or there's an account navigation, which is different than the course navigation, right? So it's useful to identify these as distinct components or chunks that could be treated independently of each other. So that's the take that I took, right? So what I did is that under the Canvas directory, I created a Canvas navigation folder, right, that contains the snippets of code that build this portion of the navigation here, right? It's basically a list of hyperlinks, right, that presumably allow you to navigate a whole bunch of places, right? And so I use the names, right? Account, dashboard, courses, and certainly there's other hyperlinks, but I'm going to leave that to you. So once I was happy with this content, right, I could perhaps reuse this, just copy and paste it wherever I see that it needs to appear, right? Right now, we have to manually do that, and it's a pain having to do that. It's very error prone, right? It's easy to make a mistake when you copy and paste. But that's fine. But when we come back later, when we get to JavaScript and React, we're going to be able to convert these HTML documents, right, into JavaScript. Right? You're going to be able to copy this HTML, for instance, and create a JavaScript out of it. Right? We're going to be able to do something like this. Convert this into JavaScript. Make this into a component. Right? Maybe to make a return out of this. Right? Put a function around it. Just wrap this with Canvas navigation. Oh, my AI is overreacting here. And then we close this, right? Something like that, and then we can export this. We can export it, and once we wrap it around a function, now it could be imported, right, by other JavaScript files that can combine the content into one big piece, right? Right now we don't have that, right? We only just have the HTML, but it's the first step, right? At creating the layout, creating the rough content, right? And then building reusable components out of them, right? So that's where we're going. So just ignore the JavaScript for now. We'll come back to this in a couple weeks. So here's my individual a list of navigation sidebar implementation that allows us to navigate across Canvas. Then I kind of did the same thing under the courses. Right, under the courses, right, I created individual directories for each one of the subsections under the courses, right, to kind of implement this here, right, this part over here, right, the home, modules, assignments, quizzes, grades, blah 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 blah. And so I created a directory for each one of those, right? And then since we need to implement the home, we need to implement the assignments, we need to implement the grades, I created directories for those as well. So we have assignments, we have grades, we have home, right? Since we need this sidebar for navigation, I created a component for that as well. Under the course navigation, I created a list of hyperlinks that allowed me to navigate to the different sections in there. There's a question on the chat. Let's see. Do we have to follow strictly the naming requirements as instructions? No, you don't have to follow the instructions as long as it behaves as described. And even that is if you get it to behave even better than what I described, right? That it's reasonable, that you can navigate pretty much where you're supposed to be, and you can see the content, even if you have to click a few more clicks to navigate the hierarchy. That's fine, right? You don't need to implement it the way we're asking. We're not going to go and look at your file, whether it's called the right thing or whether you you structure the way we said, right? As long as it functions as described or better, right? And then it's fine, and that the TAs can navigate all your implementation and get to everything, right? And then they can verify that that you implemented everything. Then that's fine. You don't have to follow the naming convention. And also, I'm following this structure again with the intention, knowing where we're going, right? That eventually, right, all this HTML is going to end up, wrapped inside of a JavaScript component, right? Eventually. So knowing where we're going, right, I'm already starting to lay it out and break it out into snippets of code that can then be reused. Yes. So course navigation is a snippet of code that is responsible for rendering this second sidebar over here. Yes. So the way we implemented the home screen, what I did, right, is and it's the only screen, really, the only piece of code that the assignment asks you to build, this screen HTML. I think I think in the assignment they call it home.html. It basically consists of a table that lays out the screen into a row of 4 columns, which basically that's what it is, right? It's one big row, right, that has 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, yes? And this one contains the content of the Canvas sidebar. This one contains the content of the Course Navigator sidebar. This is something we have to build, and the course status, right? So these two we already had, right? Which are these two, the Course Navigator and the Canvas Navigator, right? So the only piece missing was this here in the center, and I put it. So since this piece here in the center is actually, if you look at the actual implementation, if you go home, right, you'll notice that this piece in the center, is a list of all the modules, right? Now here we have this right-hand side with the course status, but notice if you navigate to the modules, you just get the module, you know, without the sidebar on the right. So what I did is that, well, since this module screen just contains the modules plus the sidebar and whatnot, right? Well, we could make this into a reusable component, right? That could be, pulled into the home, right, to render the 3rd column, right? And that's what I did, right? So under the modules directory, I created, right, this centerpiece here, this 3rd column over here, right, with the buttons and the select buttons, right, and the HR, which implements this at the top, right, and then underneath I created the these ULs that nested ULs, right, that contain week 0, then the learning objectives of week 0, then week 1, and the objectives of week 1, and so on and so forth, right? Actually, I think my AI did this, right? And so I took all this content, the sidebars, the modules, right, and then copied and pasted all into my screen HTML, right, which is basically a table with a row with a whole bunch of columns, right, that contains the Canvas navigation, the course navigation, the modules. This is what I copied from the modules, and basically that's what you get, right, for implementing the home screen, right. And what we could do in Index, right, is provide a hyperlink to get into the Canvas implementation here, right? And I'm gonna navigate. I'm gonna go to Canvas, then into courses, then into home, and then screen. There we go. Right. So here, right, we can. I didn't put the name here. LI hyperlink, close, and then Canvas. So if we navigate to Canvas, we go. I decided that this is my entry point, right? I don't define it. I don't believe in the assignment. Your entry point could be anywhere you want. As long as your entry point for now allows you to navigate everywhere else, right? So from here, I should be able to navigate to the grades. I should be able to go back to home. I should be able to go to assignments, and then the editor. So I can navigate everywhere, right? As long as that works, right? The TAs are going to be able to visit all the different portions and confirm, right, that you have all the screens, all the sidebars, all the links work, right? And it's functional. It works. I mean, the TAs are not going to be looking at your the file name or the file structure, directory structure. I am suggesting a file structure, which I think will be very, very useful when we later on when we get to the JavaScript side. Is there a question in the chat? Let's see. Curious about should we use labs.one? Where is the root directory? I'm not sure what you mean. Curious about should we use labs? Oh, with a / at the beginning. Yes, actually, that's actually a good idea. That to make these absolute routes, right, starting at the root of the public directory. correct. Yeah, so that there's no ambiguity, right? This works because we are at the index, and in index, right, it finds that, and then in this index, it finds from there, from here, it finds that you can navigate to labs, right? That's the same thing as the // that's the same thing, or just the file name is also useful, right? But this one forces it to start looking at the top, right? Not relative. If you don't put the /, then it's relative. And relative paths could be quite buggy, right? In debugging, if you start moving things around, content around, right? All these references change. Since we have many different index files, which one will be the website fetch? It's always depending what directory you're in, right? If you're at the root /, then it's this one, right? Under the public directory, it'll return this index file. But if you're under /canvas, then it'll retrieve this index file, right? Which one? Okay, I don't have an index file inside of the canvas, right? So there could be, each directory can have its own index.html file, which is the default file for that folder, right? The landing page of a website always starts, where it's the root of the domain, right, without any additional paths, right? So what you get by default, it's whatever's inside the public directory, which is this one. Right? That is the landing page, the only entry point to the website, right? If you don't provide any other folders. Yeah, only the index file. You can have any number of index.html, each one in different folders, right? Courses has its own. I think. Did we create it? I don't know if we created it. Like module has its own, right? Grades has its index, which only contains the main content of grades, right? Which will be useful later, right? When we start using JavaScript and React.js, we're going to be able to change that index.html into a JavaScript equivalent, right? As I described earlier, right? Which is a very common naming convention in React, right? That to have a whole bunch of index.js's everywhere. Okay. All right, excellent. So yeah, so we worked on a lot of the under the courses. Under courses, we have home, we have assignments, we have grades. Let's take a look at the account, right? Account, we haven't worked on account, and in particular, I want to discuss the use of forms, right? We have created some form elements, right, but they're not doing anything. Here, I just want to discuss submitting the form and how browsers by default, handle forms. Okay. All right. So, see a question in the chat. Can we have in this files only within each subdirectory instead of screen event or edit mentioned in the assignment? So the reason I went with this naming convention is that what the convention that I followed is that the index files that I have here are the implement the portion that is peculiar about that particular screen, right? So for instance, in the grade screen, if you go to grades, right, the thing that is peculiar about this grade screen is this right-hand side, the table. The other stuff is not really part of the grade screen, right? Those are components that are used across multiple screens, right? So this is not necessarily part of the grade component. So I made a distinction on the peculiarity that is being displayed here, which is the grades on the right-hand side, right? And that I made the index.html. And the reason, again, is because in the future, when we get to JavaScript, that portion here is going to be a component, right, on its own. We're going to be able to inject it, wherever we want. Same thing for for each one of the sidebars. Each one of those is going to be a component, right? That the only thing they do is create that list of links, right? So I wanted to separate those two things this is the grades. Now the screen is the combination of these three things, right? The two sidebars and the grades, right? So I wanted to make that distinction. So this index only contains the grades, but you're combining it into a full screen that will have the two sidebars, right, and the actual grades, right? These grades here, right? That comes from this index, right? If we had JavaScript, we would have imported it, right, and injected it, but we don't have JavaScript just yet. Okay. Now, again, the intent is that in a couple of weeks, what we're going to do is that all these index files, we're going to copy them, right, and we're going to rename them, and these are all going to be just JavaScript. Oops, not Java, not JS. Okay, and so all these are going to become components, right? Going to be components, right? Oops. These are all going to be part of a function, grades, that's going to have a return like that, right? And we're going to be able to export this like that, like a component. And that can then be reused and injected anywhere you want, right? We're not there yet. We'll come back to this in a bit, like that, okay? Yeah. All right. Where was I going? Wait a minute. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're going to take a look at implementing the profile. So the original implementation is that you go to accounts, you click on profile, and then you're in the profile. Right? So what I want to show you is this portion, right, where you create that, you click on a button, and it navigates to a different screen. Right? That we don't know how to do. We know how to create a hyperlink that allows you to navigate to another screen. That we know. But what about a button? We don't know how to do that yet. Same thing here, right? If I cancel, I'm clicking on a button and it navigates back to the profile screen, right? So how do we implement that? Navigating with a button, right? Okay, so let's do that. So under the Canvas account, under the profile, again, we're going to have an index. Well, I'm not going to create the profile component. I'm just going to create the screen. Right, and here we're going to have the profile. Which one? So meaning I'm not going to create the left-hand side sidebars. I'm only just going to create the profile portion of this, right? So we have a profile. Maybe you're editing the profile of Alice in Wonderland, right? And then we have a button that is going to allow us to edit profile, right? Something like that. Okay. So if we navigate, right, if I click here, account, right, it goes to the profile, right? And what we want to do is that when we click on edit profile, we want it to navigate to the edit profile screen, right? So let's create under profile a new folder. We call it edit profile. And in here, we have the screen. And in the screen, we have the edit profile. Edit profile. And presumably it's you're gonna be editing some name, right, and some input field of type text with the value of Alice in Wonderland, right? So we want to be able to click on this edit profile and navigate to that screen, right? We want to navigate to edit profile screen. This is where we want to get to. So how do we do that? How do we go from here to here? Okay, with a hyperlink is trivial. So this one is a little bit more involved, but not much, right? So the way what we're going to do is that we're going to take advantage of a feature of form elements, right? So right now the button is not doing anything, right? So if you wrap this inside of a form element, it still doesn't do anything, right? But if you point it to a URL, right, it will want to gather all the data that is in the form and send it to the URL that you provide here, right? So Now, typically, this URL would be pointing to a server that the form would be sending the data to the server. The server would be handling the data, right, that is being sent to it. It parses it, it does some action, and then it causes you to navigate somewhere else, okay? We don't have a server. So for now, we're just going to navigate to Canvas, then profile, then edit profile, right, slash screen. Okay, so now if I refresh and I click on edit profile, notice that it wants to go somewhere, but I guess it didn't go where I thought it was going to go. I think actually it was supposed to be account, right? I think I missed that. Yeah, I forgot that. It was supposed to be account. There we go. Let's try it again. Let's refresh. If I click on edit profile, notice that indeed it goes to edit profile. See that, right? Now notice that it doesn't go directly to, it doesn't necessarily just goes to screen HTML, right? Like I said, I told it to go to screen HTML. But it also, notice what happens here. See this question mark at the end? See that? Well, that is the result of the form trying to send some data to somebody, right? In this case, it's trying to send it to this HTML file, right? Typically, it would be sending it to some, backend server, right? To some URL that is expecting data, right? Here, the HTML file is not going to know what to do with any data that we pass it, okay? But so the question mark is the attempt of the form to send some data. Now, what data? Well, right now, there's nothing to send because the form doesn't have any data, right? Because it doesn't have any input fields, right? It doesn't have any values. So it tries to parse out, but it doesn't find anything. So it does not add anything to the question mark, right? So this question mark and everything that follows is referred to as the query string, right? And it always occurs at the end of the URL. So this is at the end of the document or the endpoint or the resource that you're asking for, right? In this case, it's that file. So after that file, after the resource that you're asking for, the query is appended at the end, right? So let's look at what that query might actually look like, right? So now here in the edit profile, we do have an input field. We might have also, a biography, right? That we might have maybe a text area, and another break here. And the text area might say, "This is Alice. I followed the white rabbit down the hole." Right. So there it is. So here's my name, my biography, right, and I can now. How would I navigate back, right? Presumably there would be a save button, right? A button that allows me to save, right? And a button that allows me to cancel, right? So again, if I click on these buttons, they don't do anything. Right? And we know that if we wrap this inside of a form, we can point our form to someone who can handle it, presumably, right? And so what we want to be able to do is when we click on any of these buttons, save or cancel, in both cases, we want to navigate back to the profile, right? Let's do that. You can do Canvas. We're going to navigate to Canvas, account, then profile, and then the screen. All right, so if we refresh this and we click on cancel, notice that indeed we go back to Alice, right? And notice that we can go back between the two. Now, either one, save or cancel, right? That neither one is doing really anything, right? Both of them are just submitting the form and sending its data to the target URL that you gave it, right, in the query string. But what happened? Now I do have forms. I have form elements, and this submission should have sent me the data encoded in the URL. It didn't. What happened? Well, for it to work, it needs a little more here. It needs to be able to refer or by name each one of these pieces of fields, right? And we do that by naming the fields. We give them a name. In this case, might be maybe a full name with first name and last name. And this text area, we also got to give a name, right? And this might be the biography, biography, right? Now, if we save, there it is. See that? It parses the form. We can add it to here. Let's see. Let's comment it out. And so let's look at the anatomy of this query string, right? It starts with a question mark. And what it does is that it iterates over the named fields, right, of the form, and takes the names and it combines them with the value of the fields, right? So it's full name equal Alice Wonderland, right? Any space is replaced with a plus, right? And then this one is biography. There it is, biography. And then the value in there, see that I followed with pluses in place of the plus, right? Now, if you have a whole bunch of fields, it separates the name value pairs using this ampersand. See that, right? So this behavior is meant for the form to gather the data and send it over to somebody who is responsible for processing, right? We're not going to process it, right? Typically, this would really go out to the server, and the HTML that we are sending it to really doesn't know what to do with it, right? And we couldn't save it to us anywhere anyway, right? But I do want to point out the syntax. This is a very particular syntax that we're going to be using later on when we get to the server. We're going to learn how we can receive a request such as this, right, and what to do about it, right? Parse out each one of the fields, the values, right, and do maybe store it in a database or something, or update something. Okay. Question on the chat. Let's see. What do people in the industry usually do? Not wrap those inputs in the form, or not wrap it form? So today, this mechanism of submitting data, right, has using the form elements, right, has kind of fallen out of fashion, right? We don't today we don't use the form element for submitting data, right? We might use it for styling purposes, right? For being proper HTML. Elements do need to be, for proper HTML, they need to be inside of a form. But even that is iffy, right? Today we don't use this mechanism anymore, right? Instead, we, if we do put it inside of a form, right, we deliberately disable the mechanism of submitting, right? And we can disable it by changing the type of the button and saying, hey, this is not a submit button. That's the default. Buttons by default inside of a form behave like a submit button, right? We don't want to submit, and we deliberately turn off the submission mechanism by making this a plain old button. Okay, if we do that, notice that if I refresh, if I click on the edit profile, notice that it's not submitting anymore. See that? It's not working anymore. So that's actually what we're going to do, right? First of all, we're not even going to use the form element. But if you do, just to be kosher and use proper HTML, okay, be sure to disable its behavior with button, right? Okay, because we're going to be building single page applications, and single page applications load the initial page, right, and then we strategically replace content using JavaScript. We inject content, we replace it, update it, replacing the DOM, but we never actually leave the screen, the page, right? We only load that one page once, and even if we are sending stuff to the server, right, we're not going to leave that page, right? We're going to stay in the same page. That's why they're called single page applications. So instead, to send stuff to the server, when we submit something or we're clicking a button, the mechanism that we use is JavaScript, right? In JavaScript, we're going to add an on-click function, right? And we're going to provide, right? We're going to provide a function that is going to handle this, right? So we're going to create a function here that is actually going to parse all the data, right? It's going to massage it, it's going to validate it, make sure that it's, if something is missing, it's going to highlight something. If something is misspelled, right, it's going to tell you, blah, 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 whatever, right? And once we're happy with the data, we're going to create a JSON object out of it, right? We're going to send it over to the server, right? And the server then is going to respond. We're going to handle the response from the server and then update the user interface, right? We're not going to use the default behavior of forms, okay? For now, the only reason we are even using forms is that it's the only way that we know so far, right, to allow us to navigate from one page to another using a button. It's also a good reason to discuss form elements and whatnot, right, and query strings, and just an introduction to that. Make sense? Question in the chat. What do people in the, okay, got it. Can't we just put a URL in the button? No, buttons. What you could do is have a button, a hyperlink that looks like a button. Okay, that when you click on the hyperlink, right, you're basically just navigating. Right, you're not submitting any forms or anything like that. So absolutely, you could do that. You can make a hyperlink that looks like a button, but a button can't behave like a hyperlink. No. And anyway, right, eventually we're not going to want to just put a URL and just blindly navigate somewhere, right? We are going to want to have JavaScript that confirms that you can actually navigate, yeah, that's JavaScript. Yeah, can we use on-click JavaScript? Yeah, that window.location, that is JavaScript. We're not using any JavaScript just yet, right? When we get to JavaScript, right, we're not going to use that low-level window.location, right? We're going to use routing. Again, single-page applications don't reload screens, right? They load one screen and then they never leave it. So you would not use window.location.href in a single-page application, because that would reload the page, right? It would dump the current page, right, and then load some other page, right? But yeah, if you know how to use JavaScript and you're comfortable with doing that, then sure, you can certainly do that. Yeah. Yes, if you're familiar with JavaScript and all these additional mechanisms, and you feel comfortable with those mechanisms, then by all means, go ahead. As long as it behaves as is expected, right? I'm discussing only HTML. We haven't gotten to JavaScript just yet. Okay, yeah. So yeah, there we have it. So we can navigate using a form. We talked about query strings and buttons, submissions, that we're going to abandon this default behavior. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Okay, so we are done with the coverage of the first assignment. Let's talk about deploying to Netlify. Okay. Let's take a short break, and we'll be right back after these messages. All right, and we're back. Let's see the question in the chat. Okay, so for assignment 1, when we're on courses assignments page, when we click on an assignment, it goes to a page that allows us to edit the assignment, or will in the future. Do we need to use a form to pass information to the edit screen and click? No. Yeah, no. So so this implementation, right, of going, for instance, if we go back, right, accounts, course grades, well, no, not grades, screen, right? So for instance, if we go to assignments, so this screen should look like this, like that, right? That you have a list of assignments, right? You have the sidebars on the left, right? And we already know how to do that. Right? So that's what this should look like, and I haven't implemented it. I did not implement. So I'm leaving that to you. And then when you click on any one assignment, it should go to the same editor, right? The same editor. Now, ideally, we could pass arguments, right? We already know how to do that, right? We would be able to create a form that passes the data, and we could use JavaScript, right, to parse that and populate this. We don't know how to, we're not going to do that, right? It just goes to this hard-coded HTML element for now, right? That has all these values hard-coded that, if you have assignment 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they all go to the same screen, right? Eventually, yes, we are going to connect this, right? And it's going to go out to a server, right? And it's going to pass an argument to the server with the ID of the assignment, and the server is going to look it up in the database. The database is going to come back with some JSON object, right, that represents the assignment. It's going to send it back to the client. The client is going to parse that JSON object. It's going to dynamically generate this content. It's going to pre-populate all these fields, right, with the data that comes back from the server. That's way, way, way in the future. Okay, that's we first are going to learn how to do dynamic user interface in a couple of weeks, right? But fetching all this data and whatnot, right? That's we need a server for that. For A1 part 4.2, part 4.2. 4.2. Okay, so these are just for graduates. Yes. A tab page. Can we use unordered lists to wrap the contents for now? So it doesn't specify course navigation tab. For the course navigation tab. Okay, this tab you mean, right? This tab up here? Sure. Yeah, that's a great idea. An unordered list of hyperlinks. Yeah, that would be perfect. When we come back and use CSS, right, we will revisit this and convert that and style it so that it looks like a tab like that. Or if you want to go ahead and implement it as a table for now so that it renders horizontally, sure, you can do that for now. I think it's easier to use a list, especially because it could be a row of buttons. Sure, you could do that as well. Absolutely. Yep, that's fine. Yeah, you're free to explore some of that. We're not going to if we're not asking you to deliberately do it specifically in one way, feel free to explore. And I'm just letting you know that a list, even if it renders vertically, it's easier to style, right? To make it look like anything you want, right? It's a very common form of rendering raw content that can be easily styled to look like a horizontal as opposed to vertical, right? And very easily made to look like a tab or like buttons or like anything you want. And your demo, in your demo lectures, what is the difference between assignment screen and assignments editor screen? So assignments screen is this right here, right? Okay, this is assignments screen, right? Where you list all the assignments. You can still navigate to all the other portions of the application, but then when you click on a link, it navigates to assignment editor screen, which is this one, right? So it's between these two. This one is listing all the assignments in assignment/screen, but then when you click on any one of them, it goes to the assignment editor screen. That makes sense? Okay. All right. So yeah, so let's focus now on making this available on Netlify, right? Okay. So Netlify is going to allow us to point to a GitHub repository, right? Point it to a particular branch in Git. And what it'll do is that it'll clone down your repository in that particular branch, right? And it will do is that it will compile the code and then deploy it to a remote server hosted by Netlify. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. Yeah, you're going to create an account. You can log in. I think you can log in with any number of existing accounts, such as GitHub or Facebook or Twitter or Google. If you already have an account there, it'll ask you to tell it where is your GitHub, and it'll ask you for permission to log into your GitHub. It'll ask you for the credentials for GitHub, and ask you to authorize it to interact with your GitHub repository. You're going to say yes, and it'll ask you a few configuration questions, and then you can create a new project, right? And you can say from where. Is it from GitLab? Is it from GitHub? Is it from where? Atlassian, right? And you can select from where you want it. Bitbucket. It's going to connect to your GitHub. It's going to log in on your behalf, right? And it's going to start cloning down your application, right? Well, first you'll need to tell it, well, what user are you logged in as? Look up the particular repository selected, and start cloning. So you can search for repository, right? And you can then deploy the site. Okay. All right. So let's demonstrate this. So first of all, it starts with making sure that you have all your source code in source control, right? So let's stop this for a second. And let's see, Git branch. We are on main. So all this stuff that we've been working on is assignment A1, and we have pretty much we have a lot of files in here. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to check out and create assignment 1 branch, and we're going to add everything. We're going to commit this, saying that this is assignment 1. Oops, git commit assignment 1 is not git command, huh? Git commit assignment 1. Oh, do we have our remote? Oh, we never added this to a repository, right? We never created a repository for this. Oh, but we should be able to commit it. Let's commit first. Oh, 3 M's. All right, so we've added it to the local repository, but we don't have a remote repository. So let's create that remote repository. Okay, let's do that. Let's see. Let's go to GitHub. Let's create a repository. And for this section, we'll say new. And we'll call it, let's see, we'll call it the same name as my folder here. So we'll copy that. And I'll paste that. And it's available. We'll say, okay. It's okay that it's public. There it is. So we've already added everything. We're already committed. We are in the main branch. We're not in the main branch. So let's go into the main branch first. So git checkout main, git status. Okay. Let's add this remote. Paste that in there. And now we can just push everything to the remote server, right? And now here, if you refresh, it'll show the files that were pushed from your local repository to the remote repository, right? And this is for the main branch, right? We can also push the A1 branch. So let's well, actually, let's do that a little later. Let's see what we have here so far. npm start. Let's see what's in main. I forget. Okay, so yeah, it's the default React application. But yeah, let's deploy this, and then we'll deploy the A1 as well, right? So let's do that. Let's go to React, the Netlify. Let's go to Netlify. Yes, here we're gonna Netlify. And in Netlify, let's log in. You're gonna create an account, right? We can create a new website. So we're going to import it from a repository. We're going to select GitHub. It's going to log into GitHub for us, and we can search for that repository we just created. And I think it has a Canvas name in it. There's going to be a couple of these because I'm teaching several other sections. Yeah, so we have a couple of 4,500 sections. We have and this is the one we just created. Right, so we're going to select this one we just created. And it's going to ask you which branch do you want to deploy. Well, we only have the main branch. It's going to do an npm run builds, right? That's going to transpile. It's going to convert any React high-level React.js into lower-level HTML, JavaScript, and things like that, right? It's going to create a bundle, right? It's going to compact all the source code into the smallest possible minified version of it, right? And then it's going to instead of being hundreds of files like we currently have, right, it's going to compile it into just a few dozen files, right? All right, npm build, blah blah blah, it's done. Okay, deploy. So this is going to go to the deploy screen where you can see what's going on. There it is. So it's building this. You can click on it and see the logs on the machine where this is being built and deployed. Right. Notice that it's doing a cloning. See, it's cloning our repository, and it's at some point it's going to do an npm run build. Okay, so it's done compiling. Looks like it's done compiling, and so here's where it deploys, right? And it gives us a default name, right? The name that it gave us was coruscating Moxie 2, and then some hexadecimal number. And we can open it up. We can say production deploy, and this is exactly what we have locally, right? So this is running on the remote server, and this is running on our local server. See that? So this is locally on our machine, and this is on our remote server, and they look identical. Everybody good? Okay. So we also have the other branch, though, right? So we could do that. We can stop it locally. We can. All right. I'm sorry. We did push A1 already, didn't we? Yes, we pushed A1 already. So yeah. So we can go to the deploy. Wait a minute. Options. Go Polygon. Where is options? Retry. Deploy settings. Deploy settings. In the deploy settings, you can configure a few things, right? We need to configure this npm build, right? The build command. We're going to configure that, right? What we're going to do is that the build process that Netlify uses is a little strict. It's quite strict. It's strict, right? For instance, if you have some JavaScript that has some minor issues, right, it will fail the build, right? And I mean, really minor. Like for instance, if you declare a variable, right, and you don't use that variable, I mean, that's not like it's going to break anything, right? Well, it is a bad practice, right, to declare variables and then never use them. Well, the bill will flag it as a warning, right, to the developer, saying, "Hey, you've committed code into source control that has bad practices, like declaring a function or a variable and then not using it." Right? So it will fail the build. Right? And yes, I mean that is in a production environment. You want to avoid things like that, but I don't want to be flooded with on Piazza with tons of messages saying, why is it not building? It's giving me all these errors, blah, blah, blah. So to make it easy on ourselves, we're going to turn off continuous integration. We're going to say false here. Right, continuous integration, we're going to turn it to false. Don't validate these kinds of stuff. Obviously, if the script breaks and they can't compile, yes, it'll fail it. But I don't want to know about warnings or anything like that, right? So we're going to save that. Save that. Also here in the branches and deploy context, right? We're going to configure that. Right now, it's only deploying the main branch, right? And so instead, we want to change it to all. I want to deploy all branches, right? Including A1, A2, A3, all of them, right? I'm going to say save. Save that. Okay, great. And that's it. So now, if any changes that happen in any branch, right, and you push that change, then it's going to trigger a build, right? So let's go to the deploys. Right now, there's only one deploy that was the main branch, right, at the head of the repository. Let's kick off a build in A1, right? So let's do that. So if we go back to our code, let's see, we are on, which branch are we in? We are on the main branch. So let's go to branch A1. Okay, so now we're on branch A1. So to kick off a build, we need to submit some kind of change, right? So let's even just a simple space, right? Typically, you would have been working on a whole bunch of screens, and you have a whole bunch of files that you've changed, right? And you're gonna commit that, you're gonna add that and commit it, and then you're gonna push it, right? So that's what we did. We have some changes, some trivial, stupid changes. Oh, maybe not. Do we save this? Oh, you know what happened? It's my IntelliSense, my lint is removing any unnecessary spaces. Okay, so let me just add some characters here, and let's do a git status. Okay, so we've changed this file, and so we should be able to commit this. We'll say git add, and then we're going to get commit, and we're going to call it trivial change to trigger a deploy of A1. Okay, we're going to commit that, and then we're going to push git push. So when we push, it's going to say, oh, well, you have a local A1 branch, but you don't have a remote A1 branch. This is only going to happen the first time, right? When you don't have a branch remotely. Once you've created, you can just push regularly. So let's copy and paste this. So that is going to trigger a build on here on Netlify, maybe. No, maybe. Did we not configure the deploy setting? Sometimes it doesn't take. Let's see. Did it do the CI? Yeah, it did. What about deploy all branches? Yeah, deploy all branches. Cancel. What's going on here? Deploy. Oh, there it is. It was just taking a little bit. It was taking a while. So and there it is. So trivial change. You see the my commit that kicked it off. See that? It says trivial change to trigger deploy. That's the commit that I made, and it triggered this deploy. And you can see the logs, right? So it's done. Actually, it's done. And it creates a separate branch, a separate deploy for that branch, and it's going to have the same name. See that? It's going to have the same name, but with the difference that it's going to prepend the specific branch that kicked off this this build, right? So the main branch, there it is. See that? Has that URL, but the A1 branch, notice it has the same name, but with an A1. See that? That's great. So that means that you're going to be able to submit for all your assignments a separate URL, right, for each assignment, from a separate branch, from a different deploy. And so TAs are going to be able to grade grade the assignments independently, without you being worried that, hey, I want to get started on the next assignment, but I haven't gotten a grade for the first assignment yet. I don't want to break the first assignment. It's okay, right? You just go on to a next branch, right, and keep working from there. Right? So without any concerns of breaking something that is still under grading. That makes sense? So for this upcoming assignment, when you submit it, I'm going to need you to submit two things. This URL, right, of the application actually working in your Netlify, and that has a, at the root is going to have links to the assignment. It's going to have a link to the Canvas application that TAs are going to navigate through the different things and check to see that it works. Right? They're going to get grades, account. They're going to navigate to the profile, cancel. So, and they're going to do a visual inspection that this actually works, right? I'm going to give you a grade. So, okay, there's a question in the chat. What happens if we merge the A1 branch back to main? That's perfect. That's a very good, that's a great practice, right? Once you're done with, we call these feature branches. When you're done with, the A1 branch, so let's refresh. So we call these branches, other than the main branch, we call them feature branches, right? You're working on a feature here, you're kind of learning about a particular topic, right? And we call the main branch, we call it the production branch, right? It's the branch that has everything, kind of like the latest of everything. And ideally, the way it works, right, if you're working in a real for a company or something, right? The team typically, what we'll do is that developers work on feature branches, and when they're done, right, they go through a code review and fixes and bug fixes and blah blah blah. But once they're done, right, they merge A1 back to main, right? And so and then notifies the rest of the developers that they should all pull down the latest from their main branch, right, and then merge into their local feature branches, right, so that everybody's up to date, right, and then everybody keeps going onto the next feature branch, right, and they repeat that again, right. So yeah, it's a great practice, right, to merge each of these feature branches back to main. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so for instance, we could do that, right? We could say git branch A1. We could go back to main and then git merge A1, right? And then git push. So that's going to kick off another build in here. So if you go to deploys, notice that it's kicking off a build. It's going to deploy whatever you have for A1, is going to put it inside of main now. So that this old main branch, right, if I refresh after this is done, it's building. Once it's done, let's go. Are you okay? Are you doing? Or you completed? All right, so it's deploying. So we should be, notice that now my main branch has everything that the A1 branch has, right? And then I can move on to A2 and so forth. For the link to GitHub, do you want us to link the feature branch link or main? It doesn't matter. I mean, it's convenient if you give us the link to the actual feature branch. But once they have a link to the top root of your repository, TAs are going to be able to navigate to the specific branches here, right? So as long as we have the root or any one of them, right, this allows us to navigate to a particular branch. So it doesn't really matter. What does matter, and it's useful for us, is this URL, right? That includes the branch is useful for us so that we don't have to guess, right, that you did indeed use branch called A1 and not capital A1, right? There's a question that says, can we undo, redo something from previous assignments as the latest assignments might depend on it? Sure, right? Make sure that if that has been graded, right? That the TAs are going to look at the timestamp of when you submit stuff, and if they see a change, right, that it's after the due date, right, they're going to balk at that, and they're going to assume that, oh wait, maybe they submitted late, right? So they're going to go by the timestamp of submission. Once they're graded, right, you're free to do whatever you want on any branch. Okay. All right. So yeah, that was Netlify. Okay. So one more thing I did want to cover is the project requirements. Let's talk about the project requirements. Okay. All right. So the project, it's never too early to get started on the project, right? It's it could be fairly involved, and you have to set up a team. You have to identify a third-party API that will give you access to data. You have to create your own API, right, for connected to some database, right? So it's a lot of work, and you already have a set of skills that you can already put to good use, right? You could get started, right, and create under, say, public, maybe a folder that is called project, right, and start working on the project under that folder, right? Or we can create several screens, right, and start prototyping and breaking it out into multiple screens and navigating between them and deciding what is it that you want to render as a table, as a list, as tabs, and just play around with the use cases, identify who the users are going to be, right? And what can one user do and the other one can do and cannot do, right? How can they complement each other? So there are a set of well-defined requirements, right? And these requirements, I hope, are generic enough that will allow you to be creative and build whatever it is that you want to build. Okay. But I do have to set up some minimum set of complexity, right, that make this interesting. So regardless of what it is that you're building, right, all projects are going to need the following set of screens or features or requirements, right? So it should allow folks to register as new users, right? So you might already have a whole bunch of users, Alice, Bob, Charlie, but here I come, I want to register as Jose, and I create a brand new account, and I can now visit my personal private profile, okay? I can log out and come back tomorrow and log in with the credentials that I created earlier, right? It should also support multiple users logged in simultaneously, right? And the server needs to be able to know who's who, right? And people and different users should not be able to trample over each other's data, right? So that if I'm logged in as Alice, I see Alice's data. But if I'm logged in as Bob, even logged in simultaneously, Bob sees his data and Alice sees her data, right? Even if they're logged in simultaneously. Okay, so they can log in, but the application is not only usable only by folks that are logged in, it's also usable by people who haven't logged in yet. Right? So logging in is not a requirement. It's just that if you're logged in, you can do certain things, right, that people that are not logged in, they can't do, right? So we call people that are not logged in, we call them anonymous users, right? Folks who we don't know who they are, and they haven't identified themselves. And most of the features should be available to both of them, right? The anonymous user and the logged in user, okay? It's just that the logged in user can do many more things than the anonymous user, right? So, for instance, anonymous users are only going to have a read-only access, right? They can only consume content. They can see, they can search, they can view, right? With some restriction, perhaps, but only if you're logged in can you create content, right? if this is if you're looking at movies or books or products, only a logged in person can like a product or hate a book or leave a review for a movie, right? The anonymous user could only just view other people's reviews, and see that Alice loves this book, but Bob hates that movie. Okay, so only logged in people can create content, and anonymous user can only view content. Yes. Okay. All right. So so your application should have a landing page, right? That's either mapped to /home or just slash. And whether you're logged in or not, right? You will see different things in this home screen, right? If you are anonymous, right? Well, actually, both anonymous and logged in, they should see some dynamic content that changes over time. Presumably, even every time you reload the screen, it's different, right? So the content is dynamic, it's different. Presumably, you're hitting some remote API from where you are grabbing the data, some kind of data feed, right? And you are generating the content dynamically. It could be, the latest set of movies, the latest news, the latest books that have been published, maybe the latest conversation between different users, or the fact that somebody just liked some movie or some book, right? You have a feed of activity of folks generating something. So that is here in the home screen, and it's available by anybody, right? Whether you're logged in or not. But if you are logged in, right, in addition, right, you should be able to see content in the home screen that is particular to you having logged in, right? So if I'm Alice and I just logged in, it should, at a minimum, it should, greet me. It says, welcome back, Alice. Okay. And perhaps show me some data that is particular to me, right? Maybe, it knows that I like these books, I like this genre, and suggest books of the similar genre or author or something like that, right? Or just post the latest news that based on the topics of my interest, right? Which is for me. So anyway, there should be logged in content. Okay. All right. So then it should provide a mechanism or screens that allow you to interact with a third-party API of your choice. Okay, so what does that mean? So it means that you have to choose a topic, right, that you'll choose together with your teammates. Right? It could be about sports, about food, about books, movies, stocks, right? Whatever. You can choose whatever topic. And then around that API, you're going to find an API that provides you some data for that topic that is going to live in somebody else's database, right? It's going to live in somebody else's service or remote server, right? That and is going to make available the data that you can interact with that data through some set of URLs, right? And you do not control this API, right? It belongs to someone else, and presumably, hopefully, they have fully documented how to use their API. And so this API of your choice needs to support at least two features, right? Which are very common, right? But one of them is that it should allow you to do some kind of query, right? Or some kind of search where you provide some parameters and it comes back with a search result that usually would be some kind of array, right? Or some iterable data structure that contains multiple items, right? That meet the search criteria or the query criteria, right? Maybe it's something as simple as you say, I'm looking for movies with Batman in their title, okay? And it comes back, the API, with an array of objects, right? That each one represents a movie or TV show or comic book, right, that has to do something with Batman, okay? All right, so that's the first thing that your API should support. Okay, one more thing about that. These objects that come back from the server, typically they will be summarized, right, where you will have each one of these objects will have a brief description of the object. Maybe it'll have the title, maybe some name, or some, like, for instance, if you're looking for a movie, it might have the title of the movie, the rating of the movie, maybe a Rotten Tomato score, right? And what it absolutely needs, right, and it's a requirement, right, is that it should have a unique identifier, right, that unambiguously refers to that item always. It's the same item, the same ID, right? The same unique identifier, right? Okay, so that's the first requirement of the API that you need to find. The second requirement for the API is that it should allow you to do a subsequent query, right, where you provide that unique identifier, right, for one of the objects that came back in the response, that should allow you to ask for more details about that particular item, right? So if it's a movie or book or something, or product, maybe you can provide the SKU number for that product, or if it's a book, maybe it's the ISBN number for that book, right? Or if it's a movie, maybe it's the IMDb ID from the the Internet Movie Database, right? It's a unique identifier, and this API should allow you to download, further details about that particular item, right? So if it's a movie, maybe it comes back with the title of the movie, but this time it comes back with the who the director is, who the screenwriter is, who the cast is, the plot of the movie, right? Maybe a whole bunch of other thumbnails, right? And reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, reviews on IMDb, right? So it might come back with a big object, right? That with lots of cool information, right? And so now these two, you could use two different screens to interact with these two different APIs, right? Where you could have like a search screen where it has a little form that allows you to capture the query and then send it out to a server. And then the server will respond with this array. And then the search screen could render that result maybe as a grid or as a table or as a list or in some iterative way that when you click on one of those items, it navigates to the details screen, goes out and fetches information about that particular item, right? And then it comes back with this fat object, right, that has more thumbnails, more description, plot, right, screenwriter, directors, cast, plot, right? And then here you can render that content in the details screen. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. Let's see, is using a third-party API mandatory for the project? The way it's described here, yes, absolutely. I do want to offer the students this semester an alternative to enhance whatever we're working on in this assignment, right? Where we're implementing the Canvas application. We're only going to implement a subset of the Canvas application. So I'm going to write a document describing this. I want to offer the opportunity as an alternative for students to choose additional features that you might want to add. For instance, in our case, throughout the assignments, we're going to implement the home, the modules, the assignments, the grades, right? But we're not going to implement rubrics or announcements or discussion or something like that. We're not going to implement that or access to Piazza. So as an alternative to what I'm describing, students can pick a set of features and then enhance this application with those features. Now, it needs to be complex enough that it can rival a project, a final project, because it is challenging. I'm still thinking about it. I'll write it up and see if I can come up with something complex enough that it can take 5 students, right, to create something consistent. Okay. Yeah, so let's continue. So as far as we know, these are the only requirements. Okay, so once you're in the detail screen, you can see content that gets downloaded from the remote website, right, from the remote server and the remote API. But also you should see content that has been created by other users about that item, right? So for instance, if it's a movie, it might, Alice might have left a like, right? Bob might have left a 3-star rating, and Charlie might have left a review about the movie. Yes. And so as I visit the details of the screen, I will see content, usually read-only content from this third-party API, and I will see content that has been created by other users, right? But using the local database, the local server, right? So this screen is a combination of read-only data that comes from the remote API and data that has been created by other users, right? Now, because these are other users, right? The content that they created, the likes, the ratings, the reviews, right? The username who created the content should be available here, right? So that if you click on those users, it'll navigate to the profile screen of that user, right? And this profile screen should be a public profile screen that is available to anybody, right? That if you have the user ID of the user, you can navigate to that person's profile. And this will be is a public profile. Typically, it'll be a subset, right, of a full private profile, right, where you are hiding certain things that are private, right? So we might hide maybe the email, the phone number, right, the address, things that are personal to the person's profile, right? And then but leave maybe access to their avatar image, right, their username, and that's it. Maybe we provide the email as well. So it's up to you to decide what you determine to be private or public. Okay. Now, also in the profile, in the person's profile or my personal profile, in the public and the private, it should not only show the user's public information, but it should also list down below any relationships that this particular user has with anything on the website. So if this person is following anyone, right, I should be able to see all the people that this person is following. If other folks are following them, I should also see the people that are following them, right? If this person has liked the movie or hated a book or reviewed a movie, right, then I should see hyperlinks to all those reviews or the likes, right? And I should be able to navigate back to the thing that was liked or hated or reviewed, right? So I should be able to store here a link that would navigate me back to the details, okay? If I see people that you're following or following you, or you're sent a message or something, I should be able to navigate to those people that you're following, right? So that would kind of like would update this profile with somebody else's profile, right? If I click on their username, so it navigates to their profile, right? Now, so all this is available to both logged in users and not logged in users. right? Anonymous users or people have logged in. Now, if I visit a detail screen, right, and I'm looking at the plot and whatnot, only logged in users will be able to create content, right? So for instance, only logged in users are going to be able to like a movie or hate a book, right? Or leave a review for whatever detail it is, right? Only them can see that. So what you might do is, what we're going to do is that we're going to hide certain features from people that are not logged in, right? We're going to protect certain screens that you cannot navigate to those screens unless you are logged in. Okay. Also, as only if you're logged in do you have access to a private profile, right? And in that profile, which is your profile, you can edit stuff about yourself. You can change the email. You can change the phone numbers, the address. Something like that, right? You also have, the list of links that go out to the different users, right? The different reviews or likes or the detail screen, right? That is for both the private profile and the public profile. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so basically everything I've said is covered again in these paragraphs. Let's see, login, register. Styling, it must be responsive. So the TAs are going to try your website, right? By, resizing the screen. They're going to visit it not only on a large screen like this, but they're also going to visit your website on a phone, right? And verify that they can still use it, right? It's still useful and it's not overlapping weird or wrapping weird or putting stuff on top of something that you can't use it because it's occluding other content, right? Right, it should look polished. It should look professional, right? Make sure that you use good white spaces, right, to separate content with margins and paddings. The things are not flush with one another, right? Stuck like that to the edges. You have a nice padding, margins all around, right? That if the field should be strongly typed, right? If you're asking for a number, then give me a number field, right? If you're asking for a date, give me a date field, right? If you're asking for an email, give me an email field, and so on and so forth, right? Architectural. Okay, so you do need to implement at least three users, right? The undergrads implement 2 users, but the graduate students implement 3. Right? And these need to be distinct users that only this person can do certain things, right? And not the other 2, right? So there's something, at least one thing that one user can do that the other ones can't, right? That means that maybe they have access to certain fields, right? Or they have access to certain screens, right? Or certain buttons or certain UI elements that are only available to that person if they are in that particular role, right? So an example of this is, a faculty and a student in Canvas, right? Where that would be a valid thing that one of you could take on, right? Is implement a student view of Canvas, right? Right now, we're only focusing on the faculty point of view of the faculty's use cases of what Canvas we're implementing. So one alternative for a valid thing to do for the Canvas final project would be to work on the on a student's version of Canvas, right? A read-only version of Canvas. So you have to choose at least 3 users. One common users that folks use is choose is the system administrator, right? That has unfettered access to everything. They can see everything. They can delete, update, create anything they want, right? So that's usually one user that folks choose, and then 2 more, right? That and you have to choose, what ones do. It could be a seller and a buyer, and they both might be operating on the same data structure, right? Whereas one has read-only access to the data structure, the other one can create, update, delete. What are the required actions that a user should have? That's your choice, right? Liking, sharing, that's your choice. I have a generic requirement that I'll get to in a minute, of which liking and sharing is just an example. So let me get to the generic description first. So yeah, so 3 roles, right? And meaning that, again, there has to be at least one thing that one user can do that other ones can't, right? And there should be a screen for that and user UI for that, okay? Now, it could be that 2 different types of users can both be acting on the same data structure. Like, for instance, both a faculty and a student can be acting on a particular quiz, but whereas a faculty is able to edit the quiz, right, and add questions, remove questions, fix typos, and something like that, the user can only read the quiz, right? They can see the quiz, they can answer a question, but they can't change the question, right? And they can't rename things or change points or anything like that. So that's an example of something that one user can do that the other one can't, even operating on the same data type. Also, you need to. Oh, also the anonymous user doesn't count as a user. Okay, so basically you are really creating 4 users: the anonymous user, and then 3 roles. Maybe one of them the system administrator, and then the other 2 whatever, right? You also have to create a data model, right, where you have at least 3 domain objects, right? 3 domain objects. Yeah, at least 3 domain objects. And what a domain object is, it's something you need to store in a database, right? That you need to remember and insert and update and delete into a database that that is peculiar, right, or specific about the domain that you choose, right? The topic of choice, right? So if you choose movies, then movie would be a domain object, right? Also, these are non-human objects, right? They don't represent human beings. They represent inanimate objects, right? That you need to store in a database, right? And it's specific to your domain of choice, okay? If it's music, then maybe the domain objects might be a song, an album, right? A playlist. These are things that you might need to store in a database, and it's specific to your choice of topic, right? There are other things that you might need to store in a database that are not domain objects, right? So, for instance, a like or a review, right? Those are not specific to your domain, right? You can like a book, you can like a movie, you can like a person, right? You can create you can like a course, right? So like, instead, it's not a domain object, it's a relationship, right? And there too, there's a requirement. You need to create at least 3 types of relationships, right? You need to create a relationship between users, a relationship between a user and a domain object, and then a relationship between a domain object and another domain object, right? So, for instance, a relationship between a user and another user is that a user maybe follows a user, right? That's a relationship, right? You need to record in a record in a database saying that, hey, Alice likes Bob, right? So it's kind of like it's a record that has 2 foreign keys, right? One points to user 1 and the other points to user 2, right? So that's a type of relationship, a user to a user, to human being to human being, right? Another user-to-user relationship might be sending a message. I left you a message, I replied to you, that is a relationship between a human user and another human being, right? That's also a valid user-to-user relationship. Okay, so that's one requirement. The other requirement is a relationship between a user and a domain object, right? A relationship between a human being and an inanimate object, right? And so, for instance, Alice likes Batman. That's a relationship between a human and non-human inanimate object, right? And the relationship is called like, right? Or hate, or sharing, or leave a review, right? Those are all relationships, right? They're not domain object. It relates a human being with a domain object. It's a relationship. Make sense? So at least one of those. And finally, you need another relationship between domain objects, relating one domain object with another domain object. For instance, albums contain songs, right? So that's an example of a domain object related to another domain object, right? Where you might have multiple songs referencing the same album, because they're all inside of that album, right? So they all have the same foreign key pointing to the same album. That's an example of relationships between a domain object and another domain object. There's no human being involved, right? In that relationship. It's just two inanimate objects that are related to one another, a song being part of an album. Okay, that makes sense, right? So there we go. So we have a third-party API, being able to log in, a profile, interacting with a search, right, and doing details, seeing any data that is associated in the detail screen, navigating to users who have interacted, right? I can see somebody else's profile, but in my profile, only personal, I can change stuff. And profiles have links to the various things that are related to me. And I might have a relation between humans, relationship between humans and domain objects and other domain objects. That makes sense? There we go. Yeah, so that is the project. All right. Let's see. Anything else? Did I miss? Did I forget anything? So I'm going to write up a set of requirements for an alternative project that is going to give you the choice, right, of doing something with the assignment that we're going, where you can expand on the a feature, a set of features about the assignment, where you can just continue. Now, there'll be certain things that you're going to get for free already, right? Like, for instance, the login and registration, we are going to do that in an assignment, right? So that's for free, right? And we are going to have a profile already. So that's for free, because you're going to do an assignment that does that. So that doesn't count. So there has to be additional work, additional requirements, right, that elevate the complexity of this new project alternative, right? That is equivalent to the amount of work that you would have to implement for this project assignment. So let me think about that. Questions on the chat. It says, can we use PrimeNG, Prime React, and UI component? Absolutely, yes. Refer Pinterest and UX, absolutely, yes. So in the assignments, we are asking you to stay within the components and icons and CSS library, and also the stack that we've chosen, right? We have React.js in the front end, we have Node.js in the middle tier, we have Mongo in the database. That's for the assignment. Now, for the project, you are free to explore, right, beyond what we cover here, right? So if instead of using React, you want to try out Vue.js, right, or Angular, or Meteor, or any other alternative front end, by all means, please do. Also for the middle tier, if you want to try out a different middle tier, maybe Firebase or Java or .NET, right? Or Python, Django. For the middle tier, absolutely, please do so. Same thing for the database. If you want to try out, maybe you've taken 5200 and you're familiar with other databases, you find that more useful. Absolutely, you want to try MySQL or SQL Server for the database. Absolutely, but that's for the project, right? And it'll be a decision that you will make amongst yourselves, right? On what is the stack that you want to work on. Okay. Again, the size of the teams is anywhere between 1 and 5, right? So you could go at it alone completely, or 5 users. The requirements are the same, right? Not because you have less users, less folks in the same team, the requirements are easier, and not because you're a bigger team, they go harder. Actually, larger teams are hard to manage, right? They're much more complex, and it'll actually be a challenge, especially if you're working with somebody who you haven't worked with before. I would actually discourage you from, creating large teams. Right? Only join a 5-group team if you can trust the other 4 folks, right? That they're not going to leave you hanging. Unfortunately, too often towards the end of the semester, there's always a drama that somebody complains about someone else not having cooperated, or they went MIA, and that someone had to do all the work. So only join larger teams if you trust those folks. I don't want to hear about any drama. Please deal with this on your own. Also, because typically I know about it when it's way too late to do anything. Right? I would say that the ideal team size is anywhere between 2 and 3. I think that's the ideal team size, and the complexity is enough that 2 of you could, or 3 of you can certainly work it out. Okay. All right. Yeah, so that's all I have for you today. Any questions? All right. If there are no questions, then good night, everyone. Oh, absolutely. Yes, you can absolutely use frames and SVGs. Yeah, last semester, somebody used SVGs to create a small graphic editor. And it was pretty cool. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Ming. What's up?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, like, why when you deployed the main branch and the A1 branch, I thought there were only like minor differences, but they were rendered like very differently. Like one was rendering
Oh, they
the
did?
React logo.
This one? Let's see. I think they should be identical. And here's main.
Yeah, I mean now because they're merged. Before they were merged, I think like when you were trying to render the main branch, it
Yep.
was rendering the React logo.
The main, what in main, I believe main still had the default project without us having changed anything. It had the index. This was not commented out in main, and it was rendering in the root right, is that it was injecting this app.js, which contains the edit, the image, right, and the hyperlink. So that's what must have happened. We can take a look at the repo, right, and go to main, and if we go to source and take a look at the index, so it's broken, but we should be able to look at the history and see that that before, right, before, yeah, it was not, it was you can see the index.js. Notice that it was not commented out, right?
Okay.
So when we merged A1, yes, it commented out, but before we merged, it was not commented out, so it was rendering the app. Also, probably index, yeah, index must have had, yeah, the root. See that? It didn't have any of the hyperlinks that allowed you to go to A1, A2, or anything like. Yeah, we hadn't even, see that? We hadn't even added labs or A1 or A2 or anything like that. It was the default out of the box React application.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. I mean, these not covered in lectures yet, but in the product science. Yeah, sure. The you can take a look at the site. They're not required for the assignment. We can take a look at it next week. And they're not going to be in the quiz. All right. Good night, everybody. Games be considered for project? Yeah, sure. You can do web-based games. Absolutely. All right. Good night.